The stench of decay hit me first, a thick wall of mildew and neglect clinging to the overgrown path. I crunched on broken glass, the rhythmic soundtrack of our ill-advised weekend getaway to Camp Evergreen. We were 5 college friends, drawn back to this abandoned summer camp on a remote lake in the Scottish Highlands by a wave of nostalgia and the promise of a weekend away from London's relentless drizzle. Leading the pack was Liam, our resident daredevil, his phone perpetually poised to capture content for his ever-growing TikTok following. "Guys, this is gonna blow up," he whooped, his voice echoing eerily in the stillness. We reached a clearing, the skeletal remains of wooden cabins huddled together like forgotten teeth. One, in particular, stood out, Cabin 3, its windows boarded shut, a single crimson stain blooming on the weathered door. A bloody footprint. A cold dread slithered down my spine. "Maybe this isn't such a hot idea," muttered Sarah, ever the voice of reason. But Liam, fueled by the prospect of viral fame, was already yanking on the rusty padlock. It wouldn't budge. Frustrated, he shoved the door with his shoulder. A sickening crack echoed through the clearing, and the door creaked open a sliver. Hesitantly, we peered inside. The air hung heavy with dust motes dancing in a shaft of sunlight. Furniture lay overturned, cushions ripped open like disemboweled toys. And then I saw it. A single, glinting object on the dusty floorboards, a camping hatchet, its head stained a dark brown. My stomach lurched. This wasn't some prank. This was serious. A cold dread slithered down my spine. "Maybe this isn't such a hot idea," muttered Sarah, ever the voice of reason. But Liam, fueled by the prospect of viral fame, was already yanking on the rusty padlock. It wouldn't budge. Frustrated, he shoved the door with his shoulder. A sickening crack echoed through the clearing, and the door creaked open a sliver. Hesitantly, we peered inside. The air hung heavy with dust motes dancing in a shaft of sunlight. Furniture lay overturned, cushions ripped open like disemboweled toys. And then I saw it. A single, glinting object on the dusty floorboards, a camping hatchet, its head stained a dark brown. My stomach lurched. This wasn't some prank. This was serious. Suddenly, a scream ripped through the clearing. We sprinted towards the source, Cabin 3. There, sprawled on the floor, was Liam, his phone lying uselessly beside him, a single, brutal slash marring his chest. Panic surged through me, hot and blinding. We were being picked off one by one. But who? Ben, with his morbid fascination with horror. Sarah, harboring a secret grudge. Or was it John Smith, a vengeful spirit seeking retribution? Just then, a twig snapped in the undergrowth. We whirled around, hearts hammering against our ribs. A figure emerged from the dense foliage, a lone hiker, his face obscured by the fading light. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost hurt. But as he drew closer, something about his gait seemed off-kilter. His eyes, glinting with a chilling malice, met mine. In his hand, glinting in the dying light, was the familiar glint of metal, the camping hatchet. The truth slammed into me with the force of a hammer blow. It wasn't one of us. This wasn't some elaborate prank or vengeful ghost. This was a predator, a thrill seeker, drawn to the camp's dark legend like a moth to a flame. And we were his prey. The scream that tore from my throat must have echoed across the desolate lake, a final, desperate plea for help in the face of a nightmare come true. The hiker, a man with a gaunt face and eyes that shone with a manic hunger, chuckled. "Don't worry," he rasped, his voice a rusty saw against the silent woods. "You'll all get your turn in the spotlight." He glanced at the fallen Liam, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "But first, let's see how brave your little group really is." My mind raced. Panic wouldn't save us. We needed a plan. John, the supposed ghost, seemed to be the hiker's main target, judging by his reaction to the initials. Maybe we could use that. Glancing at Sarah and Ben, I saw mirrored terror and determination in their eyes. We needed to distract him, lure him away from Liam. John Smith is dead. I yelled, my voice hoarse. He's been gone for years. The hiker's smile faltered. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. Then who carved those initials? Sarah, ever the quick thinker, interjected, pointing towards a distant cabin. Look! Over there. Someone's in cabin 7. The hiker hesitated, his gaze darting between the three of us and the distant cabin. The light was fading, casting long, menacing shadows. Stay put, he growled, brandishing the hatchet. He stalked towards cabin 7, his every step filled with predatory grace. We didn't have a moment to waste. We rushed to Liam, checking for a pulse. There was nothing. Grief, raw and searing, threatened to consume me, but I pushed it down. We had to survive. Sarah, her voice trembling, suggested checking for any weapons in the cabins. Ben, in his usual quiet way, started dragging Liam's body into the shadows, creating a makeshift shield. The woods fell silent again, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant hammering sound coming from cabin 7. Was he forcing someone to write a message, a confession? My mind conjured horrific scenes. We didn't know who was in cabin 7, if they were even alive. The gnawing guilt was almost as unbearable as the fear. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, a guttural roar ripped through the silence. Moments later, the hiker emerged from the cabin, his face contorted in rage. He wasn't alone. A young woman, her clothes bloodied and torn, stumbled out behind him, her eyes wide with terror. He shoved her towards us, a cruel glint in his eyes. Run, he hissed. Let's see if you're faster than her. This was our chance. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. We bolted, the woman screaming behind us. The woods, once menacing, now became our escape route. We knew these woods better than him. The chase became a desperate scramble through the undergrowth. We could hear the pounding of his boots close behind, punctuated by the woman's terrified shrieks. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, Sarah pointed towards a familiar landmark, a rickety wooden bridge spanning a rushing stream. It barely held our weight, let alone a pursuer. Reaching the bridge, Ben shoved a pile of rotting planks from the other side, creating a gap. Without hesitation, we scrambled across, the bridge creaking ominously beneath our weight. Reaching the other side, we watched in horror as the hiker reached the bridge. He cursed, frustration twisting his face. But he wouldn't give up easily. We didn't have time to celebrate. We urged the woman, who introduced herself as Emily, a park ranger who stumbled upon the camp, to follow us. We led her deeper into the woods, towards a hidden cave we used to play in as kids. It was a long shot, but it was our only hope. The damp air of the cave clung to us like a shroud. Moonlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling, casting grotesque shadows on the uneven floor. Emily, the park ranger, huddled beside me, her gasps ragged and shallow. Ben, his face pale and drawn, cradled a makeshift splint around Sarah's ankle, a twisted mess from a fall during the desperate scramble. The silence was a living thing, broken only by the dripping of water and the frantic hammering of our hearts. How long had we been here? Time stretched and warped in the oppressive darkness. Then, a sound pierced the stillness, a low, rhythmic thudding, like a predator stalking its prey, the hiker. He'd found us. Panic choked me, but a primal instinct for survival surged to the forefront. We couldn't stay here. We had to fight back, even if it was a suicide mission. But how? My gaze fell on a pile of loose rocks in the corner of the cave. Maybe, just maybe, glancing at Sarah and Ben, I saw the grim understanding in their eyes. They knew what I was thinking. With a silent nod, we began our gruesome task. We sharpened the jagged edges of the rocks on the rough cave walls, transforming them into makeshift weapons. Our hands bled, but the pain was a dull roar compared to the terror gnawing at us. The thudding grew closer, accompanied by the unmistakable rasp of the hiker's voice. Come out, wherever you are. He sounded like a demented child playing a cruel game over here. I yelled, my voice hoarse. We huddled near the entrance, the sharpened rocks clutched in our bloodied hands. The cave entrance narrowed into a choke point, our only advantage. A hulking figure emerged from the darkness, the glint of the hatchet catching the moonlight. His face was a mask of rage, his eyes glowing with a feral hunger. He lunged, the hatchet flashing in a deadly arc. Ben, fueled by a desperate fury, threw himself at the attacker, using his body to shield Sarah. The cave echoed with the sickening sounds of bone meeting metal. A scream, raw and primal, ripped from Ben's throat. He crumpled to the ground, unmoving. A primal roar escaped the hiker as he swung the hatchet again, this time aiming for Sarah. I lunged, shoving her aside just as the blade bit deep into my shoulder. Pain exploded through me, but adrenaline masked it. I thrust the sharpened rock forward, aiming for the hiker's throat. It connected with a sickening squelch. He staggered back, a hand flying to his throat, his eyes bulging in disbelief. This was it. Our last stand. With a final, desperate lunge, Sarah tackled him, sending them both sprawling to the ground. The struggle was fierce, a tangle of limbs and grunts. I scrambled towards them, my vision blurring from the pain. Suddenly, Sarah's scream pierced the air. The hatchet glinted in the hiker's hand, poised to strike. Just then, a deafening crack echoed through the cave. A large rock, dislodged by the struggle, tumbled from the ceiling, landing squarely on the hiker's head. He crumpled, his body going limp. Silence descended, heavy and oppressive. We stared at the still figure for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Sarah slumped against the cave wall, tears streaming down her face. I stumbled towards Ben, fear twisting my insides. He wasn't moving. I reached for him, my hand trembling. There was no warmth, no pulse. Grief, raw and searing, threatened to drown me. But amidst the pain, a sliver of determination remained. We had to get out of here. We had to get help for Emily, who sat huddled in a far corner, her eyes wide with horror. The night stretched on as we stumbled back towards the camp, the weight of what happened crushing us. Reaching the clearing, the sight of Liam's body, a stark reminder of the nightmare we'd just endured, sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing over me. Dawn finally broke, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. Exhausted and bloodied, we emerged from the woods, a horrifying tale etched on our faces. The idyllic getaway to Camp Evergreen had become a brutal battle for survival, leaving behind a trail of blood and broken dreams. The police arrived, their faces grim as they surveyed the scene. But even with their presence, the chilling echo of the hikers' laughter lingered in the wind, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface of even the most familiar places. The cave floor was a canvas of crimson. The metallic tang of blood hung heavy in the air, a sickening counterpoint to the ragged gasps escaping my mangled shoulder. Ben lay still, his face peaceful in a way that chilled me to the bone. Sarah, her face a mask of feral rage, clutched the hatchet, its gleam dulled by the matted hair and gore clinging to it. He's gone, she rasped, her voice a broken whisper. He's finally gone. The word echoed in the cavernous space, a hollow victory in the face of the carnage surrounding us. Emily, the park ranger, remained a silent, huddled figure in the corner, her eyes vacant with shock. We had survived, but at what cost? The weight of it threatened to crush me. But survival, however brutal, demanded action. The hiker may be dead, but the darkness that drove him lingered. This wasn't over. We need to get out of here. I forced the words out, my voice raw. Before anyone else stumbles onto this. My gaze drifted to Ben, a choked sob escaping my throat. Sarah, as if sensing my internal struggle, nodded curtly. Her eyes, however, held a glint of something else, a chilling mix of fear and a primal determination I didn't recognize. The word echoed in the cavernous space, a hollow victory in the face of the carnage surrounding us. Emily, the park ranger, remained a silent, huddled figure in the corner, her eyes vacant with shock. We had survived, but at what cost? The weight of it threatened to crush me. But survival, however brutal, demanded action. The hiker may be dead, but the darkness that drove him lingered. This wasn't over. We need to get out of here. I forced the words out, my voice raw. Before anyone else stumbles onto this. My gaze drifted to Ben, a choked sob escaping my throat. Sarah, as if sensing my internal struggle, nodded curtly. Her eyes, however, held a glint of something else, a chilling mix of fear and a primal determination I didn't recognize. Or rather, what remained of him. His face was a mangled mess, a testament to the cave fight, but his eyes burned with a chilling, almost manic light. He wasn't dead. He'd been playing us, using the rockfall as a smokescreen. Welcome back, he rasped, his voice a guttural growl. The fun's just begun. He raised the hatchet, its edge dripping with fresh blood. This wasn't a game of cat and mouse anymore. This was pure, unadulterated brutality. In that moment, survival instincts kicked in, raw and primal. We weren't going to be anyone's playthings. Sarah lunged, a guttural scream tearing from her throat. A desperate, bloody struggle ensued. Emily, finally snapping out of her stupor, grabbed a fallen log and swung it with surprising ferocity, catching the hiker on the shoulder. The cave fight seemed tame compared to the savage chaos that erupted in the cabin. The air was filled with the sounds of bone meeting bone, flesh tearing, and strangled cries. The fire danced wildly, casting flickering shadows that writhed on the walls like tortured souls. The line between self-defense and vengeance blurred. We weren't heroes, we were animals fighting for our lives. It was a horrific ballet of violence, a descent into a primal savagery I never thought myself capable of. When the dust settled, the cabin floor was a mosaic of blood and broken bone. The hiker lay still, a grotesque parody of a human figure. Emily, her face streaked with blood and tears, collapsed onto the floor, a whimper escaping her lips. Sarah stood panting, the hatchet held loosely in her hand, her eyes devoid of any emotion. As for me, I slumped against the wall, my body a symphony of aches and pains. We had survived, but at what cost? Looking at the carnage around us, I knew this wasn't over. The darkness that fueled the hiker, the darkness that had tainted this place, wouldn't be easily vanquished. The idyllic weekend getaway to Camp Evergreen had become a brutal baptism by blood, forever scarring us with its savage memories. We had escaped the camp, but had the camp truly escaped us? The chilling question hung heavy in the air. We stumbled out of the cabin, the stench of burning flesh clinging to us like a second skin. The rising sun cast a sickly yellow glow across the clearing, painting the carnage in cabin 3 in an even more grotesque light. Emily, finally succumbing to the trauma, lay unconscious in Sarah's arms, her face a canvas of dried tears and blood. The silence was deafening, broken only by the labored gasps escaping my mangled shoulder. Just when I thought the nightmare was finally over, a guttural moan ripped through the stillness. My heart lurched into overdrive. The hiker. No, the thing that used to be the hiker, stirred on the cabin floor, one arm, mangled and bone protruding, twitched spasmodically. Its chest, a heaving mess of exposed muscle and ribs, rose and fell in a shallow, ragged breath. This wasn't human anymore. This was a monstrosity fueled by a primal urge to survive, a twisted reflection of the desperation that had gripped us all. Sarah, her eyes blazing with a cold fury unlike anything I'd ever seen, hefted the hatchet again. But before she could deliver the final blow, a horrifying gurgle escaped the creature's mangled throat. A single, milky white eye snapped open, locking onto Sarah with an unholy hunger. "Don't!" I rasped, my voice barely a whisper. The urge to stop her, to end this madness, warred with a primal fear that urged me to flee. "He deserves it," Sarah hissed, her voice devoid of emotion. "He deserves to suffer." Just then, the creature's mangled arm lashed out, a shard of bone catching Sarah across the cheek. A scream tore from her lips, a raw, primal sound that echoed across the desolate clearing. The creature, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, lunged, its other arm lashing out with surprising speed. Sarah stumbled back, the hatchet clattering to the ground. Time seemed to slow down as the creature's mangled fingers raked across her chest, tearing a deep gash in her clothes. A desperate struggle ensued, a dance of bone and muscle fueled by a shared will to survive. I watched in horrified fascination, the pain in my shoulder a distant throb compared to the raw terror coursing through me. Then, in a flash of brutal savagery, Sarah grabbed a nearby broken bottle, the jagged glass shard glinting in the morning light. With a primal scream, she plunged the shard into the creature's single exposed eye. A blood-curdling shriek ripped from its throat, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The creature clawed at its face, its movements spasmodic and erratic. Sarah, fueled by a desperate fury, took advantage of its distraction. She lunged, grabbing the creature's mangled throat with a vice-like grip. Her knuckles turned white with strain as she squeezed, a silent battle of wills playing out before our eyes. The creature writhed, its guttural growls fading to choked gasps. Finally, with a sickening crack, its struggles ceased. Silence descended once more, heavy and oppressive. Sarah released her grip, her body swaying precariously. She stumbled back, collapsing onto the blood-soaked ground, the broken bottle still clutched in her hand. Her chest heaved, her face a mask of exhaustion and a cold, terrifying satisfaction. We stared at the still form of the creature, the morning light turning the scene into a tableau of blood and horror. Had we won? Or had we simply become monsters ourselves, mirroring the darkness that had consumed this place? Suddenly, a guttural growl ripped from the cabin doorway. My blood ran cold. Another one. Another creature spawned from the darkness. As my gaze flickered towards the doorway, I saw not another monster, but a figure silhouetted against the rising sun. A figure holding a rifle, dropped the weapon, the voice boomed, echoing across the clearing. We may have survived the night, but the true nightmare was just beginning. The secrets of Camp Evergreen, the darkness that festered beneath its decaying facade, were far from over. And now, with the authorities involved, the truth would come out. The truth about what we did, about what we had become, to survive a weekend getaway gone horribly, brutally wrong. The park ranger stood frozen, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored our own. The scene before him defied explanation, 3 bloodied figures, a mangled corpse, and the acrid scent of violence hanging thick in the air. Before he could react, Sarah, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and trauma, lunged for the fallen hatchet. "Don't!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. He's a ranger, but Sarah, in that primal state, was beyond reason. The ranger's hand instinctively tightened on the rifle. A split second stretched into an eternity. Then, with a sickening crack, the gunshot echoed through the clearing. It wasn't Sarah who fell. It was me, a searing pain ripped through my chest, stealing my breath. I crumpled to the ground, a choked gasp escaping my lips. Blood bloomed on my shirt, a crimson stain mirroring the one already blossoming on the ground. The world spun, the sounds of Sarah's screams and the ranger's panicked shouts fading into a muffled roar. Darkness clawed at the edges of my vision. This was it. This was how it ended. But a primal will to survive flickered within me, refusing to be extinguished. I couldn't die here. Not after everything we'd endured. With a superhuman effort, I rolled onto my back, gasping for air. Sarah, her face a mask of rage and terror, stood locked in a struggle with the ranger. The gun lay forgotten on the ground. This was my chance. Ignoring the searing pain, I lunged forward, grabbing a rock the size of my fist. With a primal yell, I slammed it into the back of the ranger's head. He grunted, staggering forward, momentarily stunned. Sarah seized the opportunity, twisting his arm with a sickening crack. He roared in pain, dropping the rifle. We descended upon him like a pack of ravenous wolves, a brutal ballet of punches and kicks fueled by a shared desperation. The clearing echoed with the sounds of bone meeting bone, flesh tearing, and strangled cries. The violence was primal, savage, a reflection of the horrors we'd witnessed and the darkness that had seeped into our very souls. Finally, with the ranger a groaning mess on the ground, we collapsed, panting and bloodied, a fragile truce hanging in the air. Sarah, her eyes blazing with a chilling light, turned towards me. "We can't leave him," she rasped, her voice laced with a desperate edge. "He'll tell them everything." Her words sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through me. She was right. The authorities already suspected something was wrong. Seeing the hiker's mangled corpse and the ranger we just assaulted would seal our fate. We'd be branded monsters, not survivors, but what other choice did we have? Another gunshot split the air, a sharp, decisive crack that echoed through the desolate clearing. It wasn't from the ranger. It came from the cabin doorway. Standing there, bathed in the morning sunlight, was Emily, the park ranger. Except, this wasn't the Emily we knew, the one who had witnessed the horrors in cabin 3. This Emily held the smoking gun, her eyes devoid of any emotion, a chilling smile playing on her lips. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice cold and detached. My breath hitched. This wasn't a rescue, it was a deeper nightmare blooming. Emily, the seemingly innocent bystander, was the mastermind, the true orchestrator of the horrors at Camp Evergreen. Her smile widened, revealing a glint of madness in her eyes. "You poor fools," she crooned, taking deliberate steps towards us. "You thought you were fighting for survival, playing my little game. But you were merely pawns, clearing the pieces for the real prize." Panic gnawed at me, a dull ache overshadowed by the searing pain in my chest. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, scrambled towards the fallen rifle, but Emily was faster. A single, swift kick sent the weapon clattering across the blood-soaked ground. "No more playing," Emily hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a syringe filled with a viscous green liquid. "This," she brandished it with a flourish, "is the real game changer. A little concoction I've been working on. Imagine, turning your worst fears into reality, your darkest desires into weapons." My mind reeled. What kind of monster had we stumbled upon? The answer came in the form of a guttural groan from behind us. The dead hiker stirred, his mangled body twitching spastically. One eye, milky white and malevolent, snapped open, locking onto us with a ravenous hunger. The concoction. Was it some twisted resurrection serum? Emily's chilling laughter echoed through the clearing as the reanimated corpse lurched towards us, a grotesque parody of human form. "See?" she shrieked, her voice laced with manic glee. A loyal pet, always ready to serve its master, Sarah and I were trapped, cornered by a sadistic puppet master and a reanimated monstrosity fueled by God knows what dark magic. Desperation clawed at me, pushing aside the pain in a surge of adrenaline. Spotting a fallen branch nearby, I lunged for it, the rough wood scraping against my raw skin. With a primal yell, I slammed the branch into the creature's leg, the sickening sound of snapping bone echoing through the air. It roared in pain, its movements faltering for a moment. But it wasn't enough. It pushed through the pain, its mangled arm reaching out towards me. Sarah, her eyes blazing with defiance, tackled Emily to the ground. A brutal struggle ensued, a flurry of limbs and desperate screams. The syringe clattered to the ground, its green contents spilling onto the blood-soaked earth. In the chaos, I scrambled back, using the branch as a makeshift weapon. Just as the creature's rotting hand grasped for my throat, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. Turning, I saw Emily clawing at her face, her features contorting in a mask of agony. Sarah had managed to grab the broken bottle from the cabin floor, its jagged edge finding its mark across Emily's face. Blood streamed down Emily's cheek, mixing with the green liquid that had splashed onto her skin. A horrifying realization dawned on me, the concoction wasn't just for the dead. It was a monstrous amplifier of fear. And judging by Emily's screams, her deepest fear was being mirrored in a terrifying way. The clearing became a cacophony of screams. Emily thrashing on the ground, her own face turning grotesque, a reflection of the horrors she unleashed. The reanimated creature, its movements sluggish now, roared in what seemed like a primal terror. And Sarah, her face contorted in a mix of rage and fear, screamed as she unleashed a flurry of blows on Emily. The ground beneath me felt unsteady, the world blurring at the edges. Was it the blood loss, or something more sinister from the spilled concoction? The pain in my chest throbbed with a rhythm that echoed the pounding in my ears. Just when I thought the world would dissolve into a horrifying kaleidoscope of violence, a single, deafening gunshot rang out. The sound cut through the screams like a scythe, bringing an abrupt stillness to the clearing. We all froze, our eyes locked on the fallen figure of Sarah. The ranger's gun lay smoking at her side, its barrel pointed towards Emily, whose screams had turned into a whimper, her body contorted in a grotesque posture. Sarah, her face pale and drained, stared at the gun in her hand with a mixture of shock and a horrifying sense of emptiness. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden light on a scene of utter devastation. The once idyllic clearing at Camp Evergreen was now a tableau of blood and horror. The coppery tang of blood filled my mouth, a metallic counterpoint to the symphony of pain screaming through my body. My vision swam, the clearing morphing into a grotesque watercolor of crimson and ochre. Sarah stood frozen, the smoking gun a stark contrast to the pristine white of her knuckles. Emily, no longer the picture of manic glee, lay twitching on the ground, her face a horrific tapestry of broken bone and raw flesh. The reanimated hiker, its single milky eye cloudy with confusion, lumbered towards Emily, drawn by some primal instinct. With a sickening crunch, it brought its mangled foot down on her chest, eliciting a final, choked gurgle. The creature stood there for a moment, its chest heaving, before turning its empty gaze towards Sarah and me. Sarah, snapping out of her trance, fumbled for the fallen branch I'd used earlier. "We have to finish it," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. But even as the words left her lips, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she crumpled to her knees, clutching her stomach. Fear, cold and primal, clawed at my throat. The spilled green concoction, Emily's horrifying transformation. What horrors awaited us if it coursed through our veins? A low growl ripped from the creature's throat, snapping me back to reality. Ignoring the searing pain, I lunged for the fallen rifle, but my hand brushed against something cold and metallic, the syringe. The green liquid had pooled around the shattered glass, a sickly invitation. In that moment, a horrifying realization dawned on me. This wasn't just a resurrection serum. It was a weaponized fear. And the only way to fight this monster, my stomach churned, but desperation fueled my resolve. Snatching the syringe, I plunged its needle into my already wounded shoulder, injecting the concoction into my bloodstream. A wave of nausea swept over me, the world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of fragmented images. Then, a cold, chilling clarity took hold. The pain in my chest dulled, replaced by a primal rage that burned white-hot in my gut. The world sharpened into cruel focus, and I saw the creature not as a monster, but as a grotesque mockery of life. I let out a scream, a primal roar that echoed through the clearing. The creature flinched, its milky eye widening in what could only be described as fear. Fueled by a twisted sense of empowerment, I charged. The branch felt like an extension of myself, a deadly club in my hand. The fight that followed was a blur of violence. Pain was a distant echo compared to the cold fury coursing through me. Each blow of the branch landed with bone-crushing force, fueled by a desire not just to survive, but to extinguish the twisted mockery of life before me. Finally, with a sickening crack, the creature's mangled limbs gave way. It crumpled to the ground, a grotesque heap of decaying flesh and bone. Silence descended, suffocating and heavy. Sarah lay a few feet away, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a horrifying sense of recognition. We had survived, but at what cost? The green concoction thrummed in my veins, a dark echo of the horrors we'd witnessed and the monster I'd become to defeat another. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the clearing, the weight of what we'd done crashed down with the force of a collapsing mountain. The idyllic weekend getaway at Camp Evergreen was long gone, replaced by a brutal baptism by blood and a chilling realization. The darkness that festered beneath the decaying facade of this place wasn't a monster we'd vanquished. It was a seed now sown within us. A chilling reminder that the line between survival and monstrosity is thinner than we ever dared to imagine. We may have escaped the woods, but the true horror, the weight of our choices, would forever scar us, a constant echo of the screams that still haunted the clearing at Camp Evergreen. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the acrid bite of fear in my throat. Sarah lay beside me, her breathing shallow and ragged. The world spun, the clearing at Camp Evergreen a grotesque kaleidoscope of crimson and bruised twilight. The syringe lay discarded, a testament to the desperate bargain I'd struck. The reanimated hiker, its single milky eye cloudy with confusion, stood sentinel over Emily's twitching corpse. But the fear that had fueled its shambling movements was gone, replaced by a primal hunger that shifted its focus. With a sickening crunch, it tore into Emily's flesh, feasting on the very concoction that had animated its decaying body. A monstrous metamorphosis began before our horrified eyes. The green liquid, supercharged by the hiker's rage and fueled by the raw essence of fear, pulsed through its veins like a profane current. Muscles swelled grotesquely, tearing through skin stretched taut. Bones creaked and shifted, rearranging themselves into a mockery of human anatomy. The single eye bulged from its socket, morphing into a cluster of pulsating, venomous green orbs that locked onto us with a terrifying hunger. This wasn't the reanimated corpse we'd fought before. This was something else entirely. A grotesque fusion of flesh, bone, and raw, weaponized fear. Sarah, her eyes wide with terror, tried to crawl away, but a guttural growl ripped from the creature's throat. It lumbered towards her, its mutated limbs leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Adrenaline, laced with the green concoction's cold fury, surged through me. I grabbed the fallen branch, but it felt pathetically inadequate against this new monstrosity. Desperate, I glanced at the shattered remains of the hatchet on the ground. Reaching out with a trembling hand, I closed my fingers around the cold metal. Pain lanced through my wounded shoulder, but the concoction dulled it, replaced by a chilling focus. The creature lunged for Sarah, its mutated claws extended. With a primal scream, I charged. The hatchet felt like an extension of myself, a conductor for the cold rage coursing through my veins. The first blow connected with a sickening thud, lopping off one of the creature's mutated limbs. It roared in pain, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The fight that followed was a savage ballet of desperation and brutality. The concoction empowered the creature, granting it unnatural strength and resilience, but it also fueled my own rage. Each blow of the hatchet, each spray of gore, chipped away at my humanity, replacing it with a monstrous determination to survive. The clearing became a canvas of carnage, the once pristine grass stained crimson. Sarah, fueled by the same dark desperation, had grabbed a broken bottle and joined the fray, her cries a chilling counterpoint to the creature's roars, but the concoction's power was a double-edged sword. With every passing moment, I felt myself slipping further into the abyss. The cold fury that fueled my strikes began to twist, morphing into a grotesque pleasure in the violence. The line between survival and monstrosity blurred with every spray of blood. Finally, with a final, desperate swing, I cleaved through the creature's mutated head. Silence descended, heavy and oppressive. We stood panting amidst the carnage, the weight of our actions threatening to crush us. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with a chilling horror that mirrored my own. We weren't heroes. We were monsters who had fought monsters. The concoction thrummed in our veins, a dark echo of the horrors we'd witnessed. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky a sickly orange, casting long shadows upon the clearing, the enormity of what we'd done sunk in. We'd escaped Camp Evergreen, but the cost was our humanity. The concoction's curse wouldn't fade. It would be a constant reminder, a chilling whisper in the back of our minds, of the darkness that festered within us, a darkness we might be forever tethered to. The screams that had haunted the clearing at Camp Evergreen would now echo within us, a grim lullaby of the monsters we become. The sunrise, a cruel mockery of hope, bled over the horizon, painting the carnage in shades of sickly orange and crimson. Sarah lay sprawled a few feet away, her arm a mangled mess where the creature had swiped at her. Her eyes, though, held a different kind of horror, a chilling recognition of the monster I'd become. The concoction pulsed in my veins, a cold fire fueling my every movement. But the monstrous rage it ignited was a double-edged sword. It granted me strength, a twisted resilience, but it also gnawed at the edges of my sanity, whispering promises of oblivion in exchange for ultimate power. The creature, once a man, now resembled a grotesque caricature of flesh and bone. Its mutated limbs lay twitching on the blood-soaked ground, testament to the brutality of the fight. But it wasn't dead. Not entirely. A single, glistening green orb pulsed in the center of its mangled torso, a pulsating heart fueled by the potent cocktail of fear and the concoction. It pulsed with a malevolent light. Searching, hungry. Then, it fixed on me, fear, a primal instinct buried beneath the concoction's haze, flickered within me. This wasn't a mindless beast anymore. This was a predator, honed by the concoction and driven by a single, terrifying purpose, to consume the source of its power, the fear it craved. "Run, Sarah!" I roared, the sound more akin to a wounded animal than a human. But Sarah, her face a mask of terror, was already scrambling back, clutching her mangled arm. The creature lurched forward, its remaining limbs churning the earth into a bloody mess. The ground rumbled beneath its weight as it closed the distance with horrifying speed. There was no time for escape. Grasping the bloodied hatchet, I met the creature head-on. The clash was a symphony of bone against bone, metal against mutated flesh. Each blow I landed was a desperate attempt to keep the pulsating green orb at bay, to hold back the tide of monstrous hunger threatening to consume me, but the concoction's power waned with every exchange. The creature, fueled by fear, grew stronger with each strike it landed. Its claws raked across my chest, carving deep furrows, the pain a dull roar beneath the concoction's cold fury. Sarah, a desperate figure on the periphery, stumbled and fell. The creature's pulsating green orb seemed to flicker with a flicker of triumph. It shifted its focus, its mutated limbs reaching towards the vulnerable figure on the ground. A primal scream ripped from my throat, a sound fueled by a monstrous cocktail of rage and a sliver of remaining humanity. With a final, desperate surge of strength, I slammed the hatchet into the pulsating orb. A sickening squelch echoed through the clearing, followed by a deafening silence. The creature shuddered, its remaining limbs twitching spastically before going limp. The green orb flickered and died, leaving behind a charred, oozing wound on the creature's torso. I slumped to my knees, gasping for breath. My body throbbed with a dull ache, the concoction's power fading like a dying ember. Sarah, her face drained of color, crawled towards me, tears streaming down her bloodied face. We were alive. But at what cost? The clearing was a grotesque tableau of violence, a testament to the horrors we'd witnessed and the monstrous lengths we'd gone to survive. As the sun climbed higher, casting its harsh light upon the scene, a horrifying realization dawned. The concoction may have waned, but the darkness it had awakened within us lingered. A cold, predatory glint remained in my eyes, a chilling reflection of the monster I'd battled. We may have escaped Camp Evergreen, but the true horror, the weight of our transformation, was a burden we couldn't outrun. The screams of the creature, the echo of its hunger, would forever haunt our nightmares, a chilling reminder of the darkness we now carried within. We weren't heroes. We were survivors, forever teetering on the edge of becoming the very monsters we'd fought so desperately to destroy. The metallic tang of blood was a constant companion now, a sickly sweetness that clung to my throat like a predator's warning. Sarah, her face a canvas of dried blood and terror, stared at me with a mixture of horror and a chilling acceptance. The concoction's curse had taken hold, replacing empathy with a cold pragmatism that mirrored my own. The silence in the clearing was broken only by the ragged gasps escaping Sarah's mangled arm. We both knew help wouldn't arrive. The authorities would likely find the scene and write it off as a brutal animal attack, another tragedy at the ill-fated Camp Evergreen. A convenient narrative that left the true horror buried beneath the blood-soaked earth. But the creature wasn't entirely vanquished. The pulsating green orb, though seemingly inert, held a faint hum, a malevolent echo of its former power. A primal instinct, fueled by the concoction's warped influence, urged me to destroy it utterly. To eliminate any chance of the darkness returning. "We need to burn it," I rasped, my voice a hoarse croak. Sarah, her eyes vacant, simply nodded. Together, we scavenged for anything flammable, dry leaves, twigs, scraps of clothing. The once pristine clearing became a pyre, a morbid offering to the horrors we'd witnessed. As the flames danced, casting grotesque shadows on our faces, the green orb began to writhe. A faint hiss escaped the charred wound, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The creature wasn't dead. It was merely dormant, waiting for an opportunity to rise again. Panic, raw and primal, surged through me. The concoction's power, though waning, still simmered in my veins, whispering promises of a final, brutal solution. Grabbing a fallen branch, I shoved it into the fire, heating it until it glowed red hot. Sarah, sensing my intent, lurched forward, her eyes wide with a desperate plea. But the cold, predatory glint in my own eyes held her back. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about extinguishing the darkness before it consumed us entirely. with a single, brutal motion, I plunged the red-hot branch into the writhing green orb. A blood-curdling shriek, unlike any sound heard on Earth, ripped from the pyre. The flames flickered violently, threatening to engulf the entire clearing. Then, with a deafening pop, the green orb imploded. A wave of putrid green energy surged outwards, washing over us. For a moment, the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of pain and terror. When the world solidified again, the pyre was a smoldering pile of ash. The clearing was eerily silent. We stood there, battered and broken, the concoction's power a faint echo in our veins. But something had changed. The cold, predatory glint in my eyes had dimmed, replaced by a hollowness that mirrored Sarah's vacant stare. The darkness within us hadn't vanished, it had simply retreated, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. We had survived Camp Evergreen, but the true cost was steeper than we could have imagined. The monsters we'd fought weren't just the hiker or the reanimated creature. They were the darkness that festered within ourselves, a darkness awakened by the concoction and nourished by the violence we'd endured. Now, forever scarred by our actions, we were left to wander the world, empty shells haunted by the ghosts of who we once were and the chilling knowledge that the darkness, though dormant, could rise again at any moment. The screams of the creature, a horrifying echo of the darkness we'd unleashed, would forever be etched in our minds, a constant reminder of the brutal price we'd paid to escape the nightmare at Camp Evergreen. The green embers of the pyre pulsed with a faint, malevolent glow, a mocking reminder of the horror we just barely extinguished. Sarah, her arm a mangled mess, leaned against a shattered tree trunk, her eyes vacant pools reflecting the dying flames. The concoction's power had waned, leaving behind a chilling emptiness that mirrored the hollowness gnawing at me, but the silence held a different kind of terror now. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the absence of struggle. The creature, though seemingly vanquished, felt more like a hibernating predator, biding its time for another opportunity to rise. We couldn't leave it like that. A primal urge, fueled by a twisted cocktail of fear and the concoction's lingering influence, bloomed within me. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about ensuring the darkness stayed buried. "We need its heart," I rasped, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar, even to myself. Sarah's vacant gaze flickered towards me, a spark of something akin to comprehension igniting in its depths. Together, we approached the smoldering pyre, the heat radiating outwards like a malevolent presence. With trembling hands, we sifted through the ashes, searching for any remnant of the creature's mutated form. The stench of burning flesh and singed bone assaulted our senses, a sickening reminder of the brutality we'd unleashed. Finally, beneath a layer of charred wood, Sarah's hand brushed against something solid. She pulled it out, revealing a pulsating mass of muscle and bone, still faintly glowing with an eerie green light. The creature's heart. It thrummed with a perverse vitality, a defiance even in defeat. "We have to destroy it," I said, my voice tight with a cold, chilling certainty. Sarah simply nodded, a chilling echo of the transformation mirrored in her eyes. There was no pity, no remorse. Only a shared purpose, born from the crucible of violence. We searched the clearing, our eyes falling upon the shattered remains of the hatchet. The metal, though dulled, still held an edge. A cruel smile played on my lips, a smile devoid of warmth or humor. "Hold it," I instructed Sarah, gesturing towards the creature's heart. She obeyed without question, her vacant gaze fixed on the pulsating mass. Picking up a jagged shard of metal from the shattered hatchet, I approached her slowly, a predator circling its prey. "This has to be done right," I rasped, my voice barely a whisper. "No chance of it coming back." Sarah didn't flinch as I brought the shard of metal closer to the creature's heart. "We have to destroy it," I said, my voice tight with a cold, chilling certainty. Sarah simply nodded, a chilling echo of the transformation mirrored in her eyes. There was no pity, no remorse. Only a shared purpose, born from the crucible of violence. We searched the clearing, our eyes falling upon the shattered remains of the hatchet. The metal, though dulled, still held an edge. A cruel smile played on my lips, a smile devoid of warmth or humor. "Hold it," I instructed Sarah, gesturing towards the creature's heart. She obeyed without question, her vacant gaze fixed on the pulsating mass. Picking up a jagged shard of metal from the shattered hatchet, I approached her slowly, a predator circling its prey. "This has to be done right," I rasped, my voice barely a whisper. "No chance of it coming back." Sarah didn't flinch as I brought the shard of metal closer to the creature's heart. Suddenly, a guttural growl ripped from the woods bordering the clearing. A low, menacing sound that sent a jolt of primal terror through me. We were far from finished. The horrors of Camp Evergreen weren't contained within the clearing. They had seeped into the very fabric of this place, waiting to ensnare the next unsuspecting soul. With a shared, chilling look, we grabbed the hatchet in the creature's heart, a grim trophy of our brutal victory. We weren't heroes. We were survivors, forever marked by the darkness, forever bound by the violence. We would leave Camp Evergreen behind, but the screams of the creatures, the echoes of our own descent into savagery, would forever haunt our nightmares, a chilling reminder of the price we'd paid to escape the nightmare, and the even greater horrors that might still lurk in the waiting woods. We stumbled out of the clearing, the rising sun turning the sky a cruel, mocking orange. Sarah, her arm a mangled mess cradled against her chest, moved with a mechanical efficiency that chilled me more than the morning air. The concoction's power had waned, leaving behind a hollowness in its wake, but a cold, predatory edge remained in her vacant eyes. The guttural growl that had ripped from the woods moments ago still echoed in our ears, a horrifying promise of what wait beyond the clearing's border. We were wounded, battered, but a terrifying clarity had taken root. This wasn't about escape anymore. It was about survival, and survival demanded a chilling pragmatism. The creature's heart, now a blackened, pulsating cinder, felt heavy in my hand, a grotesque talisman of the horrors we'd faced. But it wasn't enough. We needed more, needed to understand the source of this darkness, this twisted perversion of life that had taken root in Camp Evergreen. Following the faint trail of the growl, we ventured deeper into the woods. The pristine facade of the camp quickly gave way to a twisted undergrowth, the trees gnarled and grasping like skeletal hands reaching for the meager sunlight. The air grew thick with a cloying sweetness, the scent of decay laced with something else, something primal and unsettling. Then, we saw it. A clearing, bathed in an unnatural green light emanating from a grotesque structure in its center. It was a crude altar, fashioned from twisted branches and bone, pulsing with the same malevolent energy as the creature's heart, and on the altar, a figure knelt. Tall and gaunt, shrouded in tattered robes, it chanted in a language that scraped against our sanity, a language that seemed to draw power from the very earth itself. This was the source, the puppeteer pulling the strings of the nightmare we'd endured. A primal roar erupted from my throat, a sound fueled by a monstrous cocktail of rage and the lingering influence of the concoction. We charged into the clearing, the hatchet glinting in the sickly green light. The figure on the altar didn't turn. It continued its chant, its voice rising in a horrifying crescendo. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble, and from the depths of the earth, grotesque figures clawed their way to the surface. Reanimated corpses, twisted mockeries of life fueled by the dark magic at play, a brutal ballet of violence ensued. The hatchet became an extension of myself, each swing a desperate attempt to carve a path through the horde of undead monstrosities. Sarah, a whirlwind of cold fury, fought with a ferocity that rivaled my own. We were no longer human, but instruments of brutal efficiency, fueled by a desire not just to survive, but to extinguish the source of this twisted nightmare. A primal roar erupted from my throat, a sound fueled by a monstrous cocktail of rage and the lingering influence of the concoction. We charged into the clearing, the hatchet glinting in the sickly green light. The figure on the altar didn't turn. It continued its chant, its voice rising in a horrifying crescendo. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble, and from the depths of the earth, grotesque figures clawed their way to the surface. Reanimated corpses, twisted mockeries of life fueled by the dark magic at play. A brutal ballet of violence ensued. The hatchet became an extension of myself, each swing a desperate attempt to carve a path through the horde of undead monstrosities. Sarah, a whirlwind of cold fury, fought with a ferocity that rivaled my own. We were no longer human, but instruments of brutal efficiency, fueled by a desire not just to survive, but to extinguish the source of this twisted nightmare. As the hooded figure turned its attention back to Sarah, I hurled the heart towards the altar. It struck the crude structure with a sickening thud, and the green light pulsed wildly. The chanting faltered, replaced by a guttural scream of rage and agony. The clearing lurched violently, the ground cracking beneath our feet. The reanimated corpses dissolved into dust, their dark magic severed at the source. The hooded figure writhed on the altar, its form contorting as the green light consumed it piece by piece. Then, with a deafening crack, the earth split open. The green light erupted in a blinding flash, engulfing the clearing and everything within it. A wave of searing heat washed over me, and then darkness. When I awoke, the world was silent. The unnatural green light was gone, replaced by the pale glow of dawn filtering through the canopy. My body ached in every fiber, and the clearing was a grotesque tableau of devastation. The altar was in splinters, the air thick with the acrid tang of ozone and burnt flesh. Sarah lay a few feet away, her body unnaturally still. But the worst sight was the hooded figure. It wasn't gone. Oh no, it was very much present, but transformed into something far more horrifying. The green energy hadn't destroyed it, it had mutated it. Its human form was a grotesque parody, stretched and warped beyond recognition. Limbs sprouted at unnatural angles, its skin a sickly green, pulsing with a malevolent light. Where its face should have been, a gaping maw ringed with razor-sharp teeth replaced any semblance of humanity. The creature let out a sound that defied description, a guttural screech that sent shivers down my spine and threatened to shatter my sanity. Rage, primal and terrifying, surged through me, momentarily eclipsing the pain that throbbed in every bone. Sarah. It had taken Sarah. Grasping the blood-caked hatchet, I charged. The creature mirrored my movement, its mutated limbs propelling it forward with surprising agility. The fight that followed was a blur of violence. I hacked and slashed, fueled by a desperate fury, but the creature was impossibly strong, its mutated flesh offering little resistance to the blade. Each blow landed with a sickening squelch, but the creature seemed to revel in the pain, its movements growing more erratic, more unpredictable. It was toying with me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came when I lunged forward recklessly, leaving myself open. The creature lashed out with a barbed tail, the tip ripping through my shoulder, spraying crimson across the clearing. I roared in pain, my vision swimming. The creature closed in, its maw inches from my face. The stench of decay and rotting flesh assaulted my senses. It opened its maw wider, revealing a throat that seemed to lead straight to some infernal furnace. This was it. The end, but then, from the corner of my blurred vision, I saw it. The creature's heart, exposed and pulsating with the same malevolent green light that had transformed it. A sliver of hope, desperate and twisted, sparked within me. With a final surge of adrenaline, I slammed the hatchet into the exposed heart. The creature shrieked, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. Green energy erupted from the wound, engulfing both of us in a blinding flash. The world dissolved into chaos. Pain, so intense it threatened to obliterate my very existence, ripped through me. Then, mercifully, darkness. When I awoke again, the world was eerily silent. The clearing was bathed in the golden light of midday sun. My body throbbed with a dull ache, every breath a struggle. Sarah. I looked around, a cold dread filling my chest. She was gone. The clearing itself was a wasteland. The once pristine forest floor was now a blackened crater, the earth scorched and smoking. And the creature? No sign of it. Had I eliminated it? Hope battled with a chilling dread. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the buzz of unseen flies. Then, a faint green flicker caught my eye. It emanated from the center of the crater, a single spark of malevolent energy refusing to be extinguished. The creature's heart. Or what remained of it. It pulsed weakly, a mockery of its former power. But it pulsed nonetheless. A chilling reminder that darkness, once awakened, could never be truly eradicated. With a trembling hand, I reached out and grasped the heart. The green energy flared briefly, searing my flesh, but it offered no resistance. It was weak, spent. As I held the pulsing cinder in my hand, a horrifying realization dawned on me. I hadn't destroyed the creature. I'd become its jailer. Forever bound to this cursed place, forever tasked with guarding the embers of a nightmare, lest they reignite and consume the world. The weight of this realization threatened to crush me. But as I looked upon the scorched earth and the pulsing green ember in my hand, a cold resolve settled over me. This was my penance. My punishment for unleashing the darkness within myself and within Camp Evergreen. The screams, the echoes of the creatures, the memory of my own descent into savagery, would forever haunt my nightmares. But I would stand guard. A broken shell of a man, forever teetering on the edge of becoming the very monster I'd fought so desperately to destroy. The green ember pulsed in my hand, a malevolent heartbeat against the desolate landscape. Years, maybe even decades, had passed since the battle in the clearing. The once vibrant forest had succumbed to the lingering taint of the creature's magic, twisted into a gnarled and sickly parody of its former self. My body, a roadmap of scars etched against weathered skin, was a constant reminder of the brutal price of survival. Yet, the weight that truly threatened to crush me wasn't physical. It was the chilling emptiness that echoed where my humanity used to reside, replaced by a cold, predatory vigilance. The screams, the echoes of the creatures, the memory of my own descent into savagery, would forever haunt my nightmares. But I would stand guard. A broken shell of a man, forever teetering on the edge of becoming the very monster I'd fought so desperately to destroy. The green ember pulsed in my hand, a malevolent heartbeat against the desolate landscape. Years, maybe even decades, had passed since the battle in the clearing. The once vibrant forest had succumbed to the lingering taint of the creature's magic, twisted into a gnarled and sickly parody of its former self. My body, a roadmap of scars etched against weathered skin, was a constant reminder of the brutal price of survival. Yet, the weight that truly threatened to crush me wasn't physical. It was the chilling emptiness that echoed where my humanity used to reside, replaced by a cold, predatory vigilance. A guttural growl ripped from my throat, a sound that sent shivers down the woman's spine. She stumbled back, her eyes widening in terror. But within that terror, I saw a spark, not of fear, but of defiance. "Help me," she rasped, her voice trembling but resolute. "They're coming. The darkness is spreading." Her words pierced through the haze of darkness clouding my mind. They were a desperate plea, but also a mirror reflecting the horror I'd helped unleash. The darkness wasn't contained within this clearing. It was spreading, fueled by the embers I guarded, and with a horrifying clarity, I understood. There was no escape from this curse, not for me. But there might be a chance, a sliver of hope, for her. With a Herculean effort, I wrestled down the darkness within, forcing it back with every fiber of my remaining will. My voice, when it emerged, was hoarse and rusty from disuse. "There's another way," I rasped, the words scraping against my throat. "But it requires a sacrifice." The woman's gaze held a flicker of understanding. She saw the cold resolve in my eyes, the desperate gamble I was about to take. A single tear traced its way down her cheek, a testament to the weight of the choice before her. But her chin remained set, her eyes burning with a newfound determination. "Do it," she whispered. In that moment, under the dying light of a dying sun, a horrifying ritual unfolded. The green ember, fueled by the last embers of my humanity, became the conduit. The darkness within me, the twisted essence of the creature, surged outwards, coursing through the air and binding itself to the woman. Her scream, a chilling echo of the horrors of the past, ripped through the clearing. But it was a scream not of pain, but of defiance. The darkness that had consumed me was now her shield, a monstrous armor to fight the greater evil that threatened the world. As the last vestiges of the darkness left me, a chilling emptiness settled within. I collapsed onto the scorched earth, a husk of a man, the weight of my sacrifice crushing me. The woman, cloaked in a shroud of malevolent green energy, stood over me, her eyes filled with a chilling power that mirrored my own, once. Then, without a backward glance, she turned and disappeared into the encroaching darkness, a lone warrior armed with a monstrous power, the only hope against the tide of oblivion. As the last vestiges of the darkness left me, a chilling emptiness settled within. I collapsed onto the scorched earth, a husk of a man, the weight of my sacrifice crushing me. The woman, cloaked in a shroud of malevolent green energy, stood over me, her eyes filled with a chilling power that mirrored my own, once. Then, without a backward glance, she turned and disappeared into the encroaching darkness, a lone warrior armed with a monstrous power, the only hope against the tide of oblivion.